Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, sustaining Alaska's pipeline and its operations today and into the future.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It is time for Alaska weather once again on this 9th of March. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information and observations by going to weather.gov/Alaska or calling us on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. You can find more information on social media 24 hours a day. Let's get right to it. Up on the North Slope, a winter weather advisory has been extended again until 6 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. That means visibility could drop below 1 mile at times thanks to blowing and drifting snow. Not expecting a whole lot of snow to fall from the clouds that may be there, and a lot of those easterly winds will continue as we head into Friday, so don't be shocked if that continues a little bit further on into the rest of the week. Let's look a little bit further south, and a new storm working across the southern Bering Sea is just getting going, and as we head into the late night hours tonight and early morning hours tomorrow, there's going to be some very strong northwesterly winds moving through, especially around AKwx, and because of that, we expect to see some northwesterlies coming up to about 55 to 70 miles per hour, and gusts to 85 miles per hour are possible. The core of those winds will shift through the region during the overnight hours, with the strongest of winds starting to diminish as we get into the early morning hours of Thursday. But about 3 o'clock in the morning until about 6 o'clock in the evening, the potential for damage is there. So now would be a good time to go ahead and bring in anything loose in the region, or just at least tie it down or secure it. And if that means your ship out there, it would be a good time to do that too, especially after the show. Here's a look at the weather picture, and you can see low pressure is still in the Gulf of Alaska. Nothing new to talk about there at all. It is the persistent weather pattern of winter 2015-2016 for sure. But this weather pattern once again is grabbing another chunk of moisture, working that through northern parts of southeast. It's grabbing another one and going to move it into southern southeast in the coming days. And it's also pulling in drier air across the Copper River Basin and working that into south central Alaska. Beautiful sunshine seen up and down Cook Inlet today, and more is on the way in the coming days. But it is making room for a powerful cyclone to work across the southern Bering Sea. This one is dropping in intensity, and you can see the front working across the central chain already. This is where we're going to watch for those northwesterly winds on the back side of that low pressure system, and as that comes into AKwx and AKwx later tonight and early tomorrow morning, that's when we're watching for some of those stronger winds. Up across the North Slope, you can see that easterly flow working around the northern slope and all the way really into the Bering Strait. We'll continue to watch that evolve as we get into tomorrow and Friday. Not a whole lot of falling snow again. Most of that is just poor visibility thanks to blowing and drifting snow. Conditions out across the west coast into Norton Sound and west of the Alaska Range remain occasionally cloudy. Let's say partly sunny to mostly cloudy at times, and conditions are fairly dry. Not really seeing a whole lot in the way of precipitation possibilities for southwest or the western parts of the interior, including the lower or middle Kuskokwim or even the lower or middle Yukon at this time. Low pressure will continue to wrap around the interior thanks to the circulation across the Gulf at 977 millibars. Most of the rain and any precipitation chances will really focus right along the coast. That could mean some mountain snow, but by and large it's going to be too warm for that across most of the Gulf region. A few snow showers may be found generally north and west of King Salmon later tonight. The big focus for big weather will be out across the southern Bering, working west of the Pribilofs tonight with a stronger southerly flow and moving rain and snow chances further north as we head into the early morning hours, and again whipping in those stronger northwesterly winds as we get into the very early morning hours of your Thursday starting at 3 a.m. Again, the high wind warning will take effect. For Thursday, low pressure should drop south of the Alaska Peninsula at 961 millibars. That'll push a front just south of the Pribilofs and work that into the Alaska Peninsula. The strongest winds, though, will be on the western side of this as those northwesterlies kick in. Some of those could reach up to 85 miles per hour on land. Snow showers may develop in very spotty form across the middle Yukon Valley and the southern-facing slopes of the Brooks Range in the east. Otherwise, it's just wind and blowing snow across the North Slope. Winter weather advisories continue there at least until the early morning hours. And for southeast, a few more clouds and any chance of precipitation for most of the Panhandle. You'll notice even some sunny spots, I think, up around the Lint Canal and westward toward Yakutat. Rainfall will shift a little bit further west toward Prince William Sound and Kodiak Island with that 977 millibar low in the Central Gulf. The other wave of low pressure will move a little bit further eastward into British Columbia with only troughs of low pressure working across the interior. As we head into Friday, really not a whole lot of change in the overall pattern. We have a low in the Gulf again, although it is a new storm that has moved out of the southern Bering. This one starts to fill in as it leaves the Alaska Peninsula at 971 millibars. It'll fill in the rain chances a little bit more across southeast and extend some of that across the open water. Once again, a better chance for rainfall around Prince William Sound and the Panhandle to Kodiak Island. Rain may mix with snow as the winds continue to diminish around parts of the Alaska Peninsula, and a new storm dropping south of the chain in the west at 992 millibars will be capable of tapping into the leftover moisture there and producing some snow for places like Kiska and Attu. Snow showers are possible along the Norton Sound coast. Nothing too exciting with that, just a little bit of snowflakey kind of weather. And the upper Yukon Delta also looking at, the upper Yukon Valley looking at snow showers there, and maybe a chance for some light snow showers across areas from Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik. And yes, the wind will continue on Friday. Temperatures today in southeast in the upper 30s. Most places, though, ranged into the lower to mid 40s. You can see that all the way from Sitka to Heidelberg, Petersburg, Craig, Klawock, and Hyder. 40 around Juneau, 46 around Haines today. Around Ketchikan and Annette, also a fairly mild day there. Cordova 46, 43 in Valdez, lower 40s for Homer and Seward. Kenai at 40 degrees, 39 in Anchorage, 37 in Talkeetna, 21 in Fairbanks. A mild day for you, just a little bit warmer out in Eagle. For our friends in Northway, a warmer day than Eagle today. A little bit of a different story this season. 30 degrees for you. And Fort Greely also showing 30 on the button. 14 in Fort Yukon. It was sub-zero for all of the North Slope from Barrow to Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. Kaktovik to Wainwright at -8, 5 above in Kivalina. Kotzebue showed 2 above, 7 above in Shishmaref, and 11 above in Nome. For Norton Sound and Unalakleet, it was 16 degrees. Galena had 16 as well. McGrath 22. And as you head out toward Bethel, it was 23 degrees. Nunivak 19. The Bristol Bay temperatures in the 30s and 40s. Kodiak Island in the mid-40s. The Alaska Peninsula in the mid-30s. Sand Point only 37. St. Paul and St. George below 30 degrees today, both at 27 to 29 degrees for most of the day, and mid-30s for Adak and Atka. Overnight low temperatures in the chain will stay at or just below freezing in the west. St. Paul at 28, 17 for Nunivak Island. St. Lawrence 5 below. The North Slope will see temperatures from 10 to 15 below, with most of the Yukon Valley in the single digits to upper teens. Bristol Bay temperatures below freezing, but just barely. South Central in the mid to upper 20s. 37 for Kodiak. The Panhandle in the upper 30s to about 40. Sitka near 37, about the same in Juneau. High temperatures tomorrow will warm back into the lower 30s for Fairbanks, upper 30s to lower 40s for South Central and the Cook Inlet region. Prince William Sound, Cordova, and Valdez in the upper 20s to upper 30s, 42 in Kodiak. The Chain and the Peninsula generally in the mid to upper 30s to lower 40s, with Bristol Bay around the 40-degree mark as well. St. Paul 36. Lower to mid-40s for most of southeast, a little bit warmer in Ketchikan and Annette. Could see temperatures there continuing to warm. Here's flying weather again in the morning view. Remember, we'll show you the afternoon version here in just a moment. IFR conditions continue along the North Slope. Low pressure working through the chain will produce IFR conditions along the Pribilofs to the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula and into Bristol Bay and the Kuskokwim Valley. Mixed IFR and MVFR conditions for southeast, and watch as that improves as we head into the afternoon. MVFR conditions for Kodiak Island, IFR between St. Matthew and the Pribilofs, and improvement expected for the chain and most of the Alaska Peninsula for tomorrow afternoon, with IFR continuing along the North Slope. Here's your pass conditions then in detail. AKwx Pass expected to see VFR conditions by the end of the day. We expect similar improvements there for Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should also see notable improvements during the afternoon. Rainy Pass expected to be VFR by Thursday afternoon. Windy Pass will likely start at marginal conditions in the morning with improvements noted there. And for Isabel Pass during your Thursday. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see IFR though for a start there, but improvements also expected during the day. VFR conditions all day long for Snider Pass, and Portage Pass looks to start that way, but with marginal conditions setting in, especially just south of the Portage area. You might be okay with VFR by the afternoon. Chilkoot and White Pass, we also expect to see improvements during the afternoon hours after a start at marginal levels. Freezing levels show that warm air loft is retreating back toward British Columbia, so it's now south of Haida Gwaii, the 2,000-foot freezing line there across the north and western Gulf, and the surface freezing line taking a little jog northward toward the Pribilofs thanks to the cyclone moving across the central and eastern chain tomorrow. Icing potential wraps that moisture in all the way to the Pribilofs, Nunivak Island, and southward between 2 and about 5,000 feet. Some of that could reach occasional moderate. Above 3,000 feet for hit and miss areas near southeast, most of that in southern southeast over the archipelago there, and across the middle and upper Yukon Valley below 6,000 feet, most of that light to only isolated moderate. The jet stream has little change in a pattern, but you'll notice a little bit of a shift here in the coming days. A little bit more of a northwesterly turn shaping up with winds up there from 150 to 165 knots. Here's our cyclone moving across the southern Bering and then back to that Gulf low pressure system, the trough driving in wetter and stormier weather to our friends in the lower 48 west coast than over the Alaska mainland at this point. At 9,000 feet, our broad southerly flow continues across the Gulf with wind speeds from 25 to 30 knots coming in across the south central coastline and Kodiak Island. A little bit faster there out of the open water and closer to the low at 50 to 85 knots. Our broad northwesterly flow is reaching speeds of 70 knots to as high as 90 knots south of the chain. But once those winds make it inland and over the interior, they put on the brakes. Only 10 to 20 knots seen there, most of that from a southerly direction over the Tanana Valley, and they bend to the west and moving over the north slope around 10 to 20 knots there. For southeast, 25 to as high as 40 knots, especially along the outer coast. At 3,000 feet, you can see our south and westerly winds here a little more spread out and diffuse. 25 to 50 knot winds expected across the eastern Gulf. Stronger winds south of Sand Point at 55 knots, wrapping into the low pressure system here and across the central Aleutians at 3,000 feet. You can see where our high wind potential is coming from. Those winds from St. Matthews southward all the way to the central chain, even as far west as Kiska, could reach as high as 60 to 70 knots tomorrow. Across the interior, 10 to 15 knot winds are seen across the Yukon Valley. Northward, a slightly faster flow from the east at 15 to as strong as 35 knots right across Point Barrow. Turbulence potential shows our focus, of course, then will be in the central chain below 4,000 feet from Adak to Atka. Watch for isolated severe, of course, with those strong winds during the early morning hours and into the midday. Look for improvements again during the late afternoon and into the evening hours as a core of winds shift south of the chain and out to sea. Below 4,000 feet for the Bristol Bay region and south of Bethel, you could experience some chop there and into the Sand Point region. Now, as we go into Friday, watch for some of those stronger winds to shift into some of the gap-prone positions here as low pressure moves out in the Gulf. Could be dragging a lot of wind and squeezing that through some of the narrow gaps and valleys across the Alaska Peninsula. So keep that in mind if you've got plans that take you into Friday or perhaps even Saturday for air travel in Southwest. For most of Southeast, the interior and the North Slope, occasional bumps, but nothing too significant. And that's how your aviation weather shapes up for your Thursday. We'll be back with a look at the sea ice edge and your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Weather balloons here at Fairbanks International Airport are released by the Weather Service twice a day, and the timing of those releases are such that they are coordinated with all the other releases around the world. And that data then, which provides a vertical profile of temperature and relative humidity and pressure in the atmosphere, is then integrated into the forecast models run by the by the Weather Service.
How can you forecast the temperatures when an inversion is present? It is a difficult puzzle. In Fairbanks, often the weather forecast says today, clear skies, high temperatures from 20 below to 10 above, coldest in the valley and mildest in the hills. A 30-degree range. This is not uncommon in the interior winter. It's a difficult puzzle to try to put very precise numbers. We need a broad range because within that shallow layer, you go from such cold temperatures to such warm temperatures. That's just the way it is here in the inhabited elevations of interior Alaska. Well, anything you want to forecast, including a temperature inversion, has to be studied. You have to learn how the inversion works in order to forecast its future behavior. And part of learning how it works involves gathering data. And every day out at the Fairbanks International Airport, a weather balloon is launched. On the end of the balloon is a thermometer, up it goes, and we get the vertical profile of temperature in the atmosphere. And that's real good data. You can see the inversion with that. Problem is, the weather balloon only goes up twice a day. And for forecasting, detecting and forecasting the jet stream, which operates on broad spatial and temporal scales, twice a day is for most purposes adequate. However, down here in this fine spatial scale right in urban Fairbanks, we need more than twice a day to really understand the inversion, especially its formation and its dissipation.
So the weather balloons that are released at Fairbanks International are timed with all those other global releases, and they are not actually at times which are very dynamically active here in Fairbanks, which is another reason that we're interested in doing this experiment with an aircraft and also additional weather balloon releases to sample some of those more dynamically active times of the day.
Basically, in preparing the sondes, you have to take the sonde out of the package, prepare the sensors, and then you'll fill up the weather balloon, then need to calibrate the instrument inside. So that's the most important part of balloon preparation. So when we're calibrating the instrument, we make sure that the temperature of the sensor is realistic with the temperature either of the room or outside, wherever the sonde is being calibrated, as well as pressure, making sure that's at our level, and also the relative humidity, that looks realistic. We use these weather balloons that when they're filled up with helium, they're approximately 6 feet wide. And by the time that they reach the top of the atmosphere where the balloon pops, they're about 20 feet wide. So they're huge. It's hard to even imagine. After we get clearance from the FAA, we'll go outside, take the radio sonde, attach it to the balloon, and then make sure there aren't any planes going by just in case, and let her go. And the computer inside actually picks up the signal automatically. It'll tell you exactly when the balloon was launched, and the data will come processing in from there. After we launch the balloon, I'll go back inside the building and to make sure that the data that's coming in on the computer looks realistic, making sure the pressure decreases with height, the relative humidities look realistic, and in my cases, looking at temperature inversion, that the temperature is increasing with height. Typically in the atmosphere, we see temperature decreasing with height, but in these special cases, that's what I'm looking for. And then I can watch as the temperature progresses vertically into the atmosphere, as that sensor's rising, and I can see where the top of the inversion layer is. So the National Weather Service currently launches weather balloons twice a day, but I wanted to launch weather balloons more frequently than that to see what was happening between those launches. So I wanted to take a look at what's happening between that 4 p.m. launch and that 4 a.m. launch, and then what's happening between the 4 a.m. and the 4 p.m. So I launched these weather balloons every 2 to 3 hours to gain a better temporal resolution of what's going on in the atmosphere.
Our research asked the question, what will surface-based temperature inversions look like in Alaska over the next 100 years? And the primary tool for studying future projections are global climate models. In fact, they're the only tool. But they're not perfect for answering our question because we're interested in information over a city landscape scale, which is a few miles, 5 miles, 10 miles. Global climate models provide information on a 100-mile scale. So we need to get that information from this coarse scale and downscale it to a higher resolution so it's useful for us. And the way we do that is we take climate information from the global climate model and we feed it into our regional model, which has a domain over Alaska, at a resolution of, say, a few miles instead of hundreds of miles. And the large-scale climate comes from these global climate models, and then we run our simulation over Alaska. We have done regional downscaling simulations for 20 years in the 20th century, from 1979 to 1999. We've done 10 years from 2010 to 2019, and then from 2050 to 2059, and 2090 to 2099. So with the regional model, we've taken these 4 slices over time, fed by the global climate model. And what we find, first of all, in the 20th century simulation is that the regional model does a much better job of simulating the vertical surface-based temperature inversions over Fairbanks and the other cities in Alaska. And as we go through the 21st century, those 3 other slices, as the global climate warms, we find that the temperature inversions in the lowest layer don't really change in strength. The strength stays the same, but the whole profile gets warmer. So this study provides a first look at what would be happening to temperature inversions in the future. We need to ask other questions like, how will this frequency change? Will they occur as often? Will the season be much shorter? There's a variety of other questions we need to ask to develop a better picture for how temperature inversions will change in the future. And our first cut answer that we have suggests that we'll still have to worry about the same sort of air quality issues, because in the near surface, the strength of the inversion will be about the same.
Time now for a look at your sea ice edge, and with a persistent weather pattern and a consistent weather pattern at that. With little change in the weather comes little change in the ice, and you can see very similar conditions to what we saw yesterday. Here's St. Matthew, the Pribilofs, and the southwestern coast, and we still have ice that is relatively thin around Nunivak Island and St. Matthew, as well as areas even further north around Barrow. If you look at the webcams there, you can see some open water. That is a real thing, and most of the ice around some of the southern areas and even the north remains fairly thin. You can always check the latest conditions anytime at weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. On to the winds and waves now. Starting in southeast, as always, northerlies across the Lynn Canal, 25 knots with a 5-foot sea. Southerlies around the Clarence Strait, 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. And along the outer coast, winds typically around 15 to 20, a little bit more of an easterly flow up north and a southwesterly flow down south, 15 to 20 there with 12-foot seas south of Sitka. For Friday, a northerly wind continues in the Lynn Canal, 20 knots with more of a southeasterly flow in the Clarence Strait, still 25 and 5-foot seas there. Southeasterlies work all the way up the outer coast now, 25 to as high as 30 knots a little bit further south. The 30 knots there just outside of Sitka with a 13-foot sea, 11-foot seas outside of Icy Bay and around Yakutat, 20-knot winds there. For south central along the Cook Inlet, 20 to 25 for most areas. Looking at a northeasterly flow west of the Barrens at 30 knots. And a westerly flow working across the north and western Gulf at 20 to 25. Look for seas from 9 to 10 feet. Inside of Prince William Sound, light winds from the north and east and a 2-foot sea for Thursday, and a little bit of a stronger wind on Friday with an easterly shift. 4-foot seas expected there, and seas coming up to 10 to as high as 15 feet east of Kodiak Island. Inside of Shelikof Strait, a 30-knot wind with a 10-foot sea, and winds continue from the north and northeast down Cook Inlet at about 20 to 30 for Friday. Across the Alaska Peninsula, 30 to 40-knot winds across the Bering Sea coast and Bristol Bay, 6 to 8-foot seas there, and 8 to 12-foot seas across the Pacific coast, 30 to 35 for the Alaska Peninsula on Thursday, with winds shifting to a north and easterly direction. On Friday, look for winds in Bristol Bay at 30 knots with a 7-foot sea, northerly south of Sand Point and King Cove with an 18-foot sea on a 30-knot wind, northeasterlies from Castle Cape to Chignik on Friday with a 16-foot sea there. And as we get out to the Aleutians, look for higher gusts to 70 knots north and west of Adak and Atka. Once again, a high wind warning begins here at 3 o'clock in the morning, continues until 6 o'clock tomorrow night for winds that could reach upwards of 85 miles per hour on land, and those would be the stronger gusts that are possible. Look for those northwesterlies to also affect areas from Adak to Kiska with a 55-knot wind and 25-foot seas there. Storm force winds, of course, 60-knot winds south of Adak and Atka, and looking for north and northwesterlies to be considerably lighter for Unalaska Nikolsky on Thursday. 25 knots there with 10 to 20-foot seas, the highest, of course, along the Pacific side, and those ranges high as 31 to 32-foot seas there as we get into Thursday. Considerably better conditions for Friday, but there's still going to be some stronger winds. Those shift eastward toward Nikolsky and Unalaska, 40 to 45 knots with gales there around the region. Look for seas up to 20 feet from Unalaska to Adak and Atka, and 21 to 23-foot seas on the Pacific side. Out across the west, 20 to 30-knot winds there from Kiska to Attu as all winds shift to more of a northwesterly direction. Across the west coast, northeasterlies from St. Lawrence Island to Nunivak Island and St. Matthew, 25 to 30-knot winds expected there. 35-knot winds coming in from the east and northeast into Kuskokwim Bay with 8-foot seas in the Pribilofs for Thursday. Those become more of a northeasterly flow on Friday and diminish somewhat, 25 to 35 in the south. Over the ice, a northerly wind at 20 to 25 with 6-foot seas around open waters there around for St. Matthew. Still watching for freezing spray. And across the north slope, easterlies will continue. That means blowing and drifting snow remains possible, and winter weather advisories will be in effect until at least 6 o'clock in the morning tomorrow, perhaps even longer into Thursday afternoon. Northeasterlies for Cape Lisburne and Point Hope, and northerlies outside of Kotzebue Sound. Those come up a little bit more on Friday to a northwesterly direction at 20 knots, and north and easterly winds continue for the Beaufort Seacoast with a little bit of a stronger push from the east around Wainwright and just offshore at 30 knots for your Friday. Let's look at your marine weather. Let's take a look again at your surface weather conditions as we head into tonight and tomorrow. A low pressure system is going to work its way a little bit more into British Columbia, so this is not directly moving northward towards southeastern Alaska tonight. It is a 970 millibar storm. The main focus for wet weather and clouds for the Gulf will be what's out across the middle of the Gulf at 977 millibars. And for stronger winds, watch the system across the southern Bering at 961. That will track eastward tonight, bringing strong northwesterlies through the central Aleutians with a high wind warning in effect as we head into early tomorrow morning. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Sometimes the best way to find a living is to stay right where you are and study with UAS online. Career-specific distance programs from the University of Alaska Southeast are the fastest way to increase your earning power.
We connect all over the world.